Time flies at the velocity of many players who've been yeeted off a cliff by this lovely fellow. Shout out to the 102 respondents who are still stuck in that nightmare. If you can believe it, Sekiro has already been out in the wild for a month. I wanted to give the Shadow Destu a little time to simmer before doing a community ranking. With over 4,000 of you weighing in on the difficulty of Sekiro's bosses, I'd say we've got a solid sample size. Thank you to everyone who took the time to respond and comment. I'll be featuring those comments throughout the video to represent your own thoughts since I've already had my own time to weigh in on the boss difficulty. Though I have to admit, hindsight is 2020, and after playing through the game a few more times, some of my ranks would likely shift a bit. That makes sense with the original ranking being based on an initial playthrough alone though, so today's dialogue between us will be a great exercise. But before we get to that, I want to say hello there. It's not often that I show my face around these parts, but I wanted to pop in and say thank you to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring today's ranking. Maybe I've been living under a rock, but would someone like to tell me when mobile games started to look like fully fledged console and PC RPGs? Moving past the astonishing graphics, I love how in the first 5 minutes of the game you're already facing a dragon boss. This chick thinks she's got it under control, but then whoop, she's dragon dinner. And then the ogre's like, hey, I like this dragon. And I'm thinking, I like you too, buddy. You're my favorite starter champion. But it doesn't end with him. There are hundreds of champions to collect. There's a deep PvP system, bosses to complement it all, and a special tournament coming up with crazy prizes. Oh, and did I mention it's free? The game is in its early days and blowing up quickly. But thanks to our sponsors, you can get a head start by going down in the description through my download link only and getting 50,000 silver and a free epic champion. Sponsors like these go a long way to supporting the channel, so thank you for checking out Raid Shadow Legends and thank you for listening. Now without further ado, let's kick off our community ranking of the difficulty of the Sekiro Shadows Die Twice bosses. In a choice that seemingly comes as a no-brainer, the folding screen monkeys bring up the bottom of the list. I believe 1.09 is one of the lowest scores in the history of all the community rankings that we've done, so well done, chimps. It's a puzzle fight, which is kind of interesting the first time through, but on subsequent playthroughs it's more of a speed bump than anything. Not to mention the fact that in some cases you don't even need to do the puzzles. On one of my New Game Plus runs, I was able to knock most of them with my shurikens while they were jumping for a free kill. This highlights two things that take an easy boss and make it easier. First, once you know the puzzle, any semblance of difficulty it had is thrown out the window. Second, there are many creative and even accidental ways to KO the monkeys, puzzle notwithstanding. I did it first try and took no damage. This just is not a boss, even if it has really cool mechanics. 1 out of 10. I'm sure killing all these monkeys won't do anything, D-mod. Probably not. Anyone else think folding screen monkeys are just witches of Hemwick in a big open area? Let's see. Combat stunted, defenseless, tiny creatures? Check. Enemies that are meant to hassle you but are practically useless? Check. Arena that makes it easy to run away from the minuscule amount of danger that does exist? Check. Scooping your eyes out like a savage? Thank God no. There really is nothing I can say to defend the monkeys here. While they may pose a brain teaser on the first playthrough, even then there's no substantial threat to put pressure on you. And once you know the solution, you can go over 60 miles per hour over this speed bump, perhaps even finding other cheeses or strategies along the way. Like most of you, even if I do respect this puzzle, it's unquestionably one of the easiest bosses FromSoft has ever created. I don't know if you've ever had the bottom two bosses snag almost 85% of the votes for easiest boss in the game, but that should tell you just how easy both of these experiences are. If that snake is a boss, then I'm the king of NATO.
If you want to crown them, then crown their ass.
That's right, almost 30% of you voted to remove the tremendous Viper, but the rest of us are apparently too busy basking in the easy experience of this now fan-confirmed boss battle to fight over semantics. I for one accept our new wolf overlord, but this is a democracy, so I'll show both sides. The Serpent isn't a boss, I'm sorry to say that. You sneak around him, then stab his eye, then you zippity-doo-dah your happy ass away. Yeah, he makes an appearance later, but only for a brief second if you aren't going for the Dragon's Heritage ending. You're not wrong. I can totally understand why a significant minority denies a snake its boss title, but even with a quick stab and zip past, I think the experience has enough unique mechanics to justify it as a boss experience. If the Ancient Wyvern is a boss, I can't see how a boss that offers the same experience but with deeper mechanics isn't. Because it doesn't have a health bar? Nay, I say. And it being easy isn't an excuse either. Where is the big carp that you kill with the bait? Say what you want, but a boss that you can only kill in a certain specific way seems OP to me. Same with our serpent friend. Try killing them with your sword the normal way. Yeah, where's your easy boss now, huh? In seriousness, whether you consider this stealth experience to be a boss or not, it's hard to argue that its intuitive design and insta-KO mechanic make it anything outside of a cakewalk. That handily landed the serpent in a spot that would garner the easiest on any list where the monkeys didn't exist. This list is seriously skewed harshly on the bottom end and the top end. I can't remember the last time we had a ranking with 3 bosses that fell under a 2 out of 10 score. The question for me isn't if the Divine Dragon is easy. I placed it in the same spot, so I clearly agree with the ranking. The question is it 2 out of 10 basic? Let's see what you all think. The Divine Dragon was seriously compared to the Covetous Demon in terms of difficulty. I think it hit me once during the whole fight, and I audibly laughed when it was dead. Well, damn, you know it's bad when the beauty of this fight isn't enough to stop yourself from a hearty chortle upon its death. The Divine Dragon is the easiest boss to me by far. This isn't to say it's a poor boss, it would be rather difficult to make the fight hard without feeling like BS in my opinion. Joker goes on to give great analysis as to why its design works despite being easy, but says praising its design doesn't change the fact that it boils down to an R1 spam fest for the first phase, dodging a couple slow swings and grappling to a tree to shoot lightning for the kill. There's some great points here, the primary of which is that I would wager nearly everyone who voted this thing a 2 or lower on the difficulty scale would also rate it a 7 or higher on the quality scale. Difficulty and quality aren't always interchangeable, and I also agree it would have been hard to deviate from the design too dramatically while maintaining the same standard. One intriguing thought I saw was from Charlie, who suggested maybe if the lightning shot at you and you had to jump to redirect it in time, it could have worked. This design absolutely would work and could arguably have made the fight better and more difficult. I'll be talking about it soon enough when we continue our Legend of Zelda boss rankings, but this change would harken back to Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. The question is that if this borrowed design would give it the same unique feel. Part of what I enjoyed about this fight is that the dragon was as much scenery as he was boss, and my eyes needed not only to be trained on him to avoid the sword, but watching all the trees to grab lightning and chuck it his way. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. With today's ranking being about difficulty, I can't disagree with the placement. I do think the final dodge sequence is underrated though. Even after a few times through, I still get tripped up a little bit there. That said, it's not nearly enough to elevate the dragon beyond the spot that you all deem fitting for it. Thank God I don't have to pronounce it this time. GYOUBU ONIWA is easy on every subsequent playthrough, but not the first one. I would say a well-deserved 5 to 6 because it does test your abilities early while still learning the game. I think what lands GYOUBU around a 4 out of 10 is the dichotomy between your first experience and everyone thereafter. He's probably a 6 to 7 out of 10 on your first time through, but every time beyond he's more in leagues with our other bottom dwellers. That averages out to where he lands here. Kardake's comment describes very well that despite him being easy on repeat runs, it's only because he's used as a tool to teach new players key parts of the game on their first run. Things such as delayed attacks that train offbeat deflect timings, grappling hook opportunities mid-battle, and weakness to firecrackers urges you to experiment with your prosthetic in other situations. This amounts to a respect from me and surely many of you for his role as a teacher filled to the brim with loud bravado, but his role also makes it hard to put him any higher on the list. Easiest boss is GENICHIRO, Way of Tomoe. At that point in the game, you deal so much damage and you trained hard on every other boss and mini-boss that you kind of destroy GENICHIRO. I don't even count him as another phase of the final boss. He's more of a slight obstacle than anything else. Complete pushover, lol. Yeah, pretty much. Poor GENICHIRO will get respect later for how dirty he did us atop ASHINA Castle, but in the fields before the final showdown, he is more like an anthill with you being a dick that pours water on it. It's helpless and yet you still decide to fuck it up. Even if a few manage to crawl on you, you can smack them with a thunderous power that demolishes them, just like GENICHIRO's lightning. Alright, that's probably not the perfect analogy, but you get the idea. He's a pushover through and through. Still, I would reason that he makes it to this spot with a more respectable score solely on the basis that he does have endgame attack power to obliterate you in return if you get careless. That said, it's not nearly enough to push him beyond the cellar dwellers. To this point, we've only had a plus or minus 1 difference in where we ranked things, but the False Monk tumbles down 2 spots from my initial ranking. I can wager a guess as to why. I'm really disappointed by the Corrupted Monk fight. They had the potential to be really hard, but if you figure out the mechanic to just spam fistfuls of ash, firecrackers, and snap seeds on them, they become ridiculously easy. And there it is. On my recent quality ranking, there was a decent rumbling that my ranking was based too much on how cheesable some bosses are. Well, yeah, if a boss has potato AI that can be manipulated with ease by a casual player with little to no practice, it kinda skews the difficulty and the quality. Sure, you could say just ignore it and fight them straight up, but that's only if you decide to put self-imposed challenges on yourself. Using firecrackers in my initial playthrough on bosses was pretty standard, so even though I didn't use confetti, snap seeds, or fistfuls of ash, it was still enough to take a large chunk of its health. And these strategies spread like wildfire throughout the community. With the monks being one of the easiest to execute, it's no wonder why it's not getting more respect. Because to be fair, it can actually be quite a tough fight if you aren't using your tools, but we aren't playing as a samurai, but a shinobi. And And I can only speak for my own Shinobi code, but I'm pulling out anything I've got to secure the victory. If that means completely pacifying a boss by way of a blatant weakness, then I'm gonna be snap, ash, and crack until I'm shoving my sword deep down its pie hole. I'm sure many of you did or by now do some form of the same, and that's my guess as to why the False Monk isn't breaking the top 10. Emma's score may be skewed a tiny bit. I say this because I've always weighted the average scores on a curve, giving bonus points the more votes they receive for the hardest boss in the game and subtracting points the more votes they receive for easiest boss in the game. Well, over 60% of respondents hadn't even faced off against Emma or Fire ISSHIN, which makes sense considering it's an evil path most players likely won't follow until a later playthrough. For comparison's sake, only 17.4% of voters haven't faced ISSHIN the Sword Saint, so over 40% of voters that fought the final boss have never attempted the Shura route. This is evidenced by Emma receiving a low amount of votes for both easiest and hardest boss, which is normally more skewed in one direction or the other. So with that said, I still think Emma is in a fair enough spot, but our next ranks only differ by a few tenths of a point, so keep that in mind. In my opinion, Emma was way harder than Shura ISSHIN. She covers a ton of space, moves quickly, and does not stagger easily. Not to mention that grab with a huge hitbox and crazy tracking. Mitchell goes on to say that he'd take the 2 bars of ISSHIN over Emma's 1, with ISSHIN's difficulty being inflated by Emma draining your resources. All of his points are spot on. Emma is relentless in her pursuit, making healing opportunities nearly non-existent. That means an aggressive approach is encouraged, but her unblockables and delayed offbeat patterns make it hard to follow through without getting sliced down. But Shinigami argues the most impressive thing about Emma isn't her damage, combos, or even her grab range. Her true power is the ability to talk and call you Shura even after your sword goes through her neck. You know, I didn't think about that, probably because I'm too horrified at how savage the kill on her is. The reason I can argue that Emma belongs this low on the list is based on her low health decreasing the margin of error so greatly. If Emma was a 2 or 3 health bar fight, I think it's entirely possible she could be cracking the top 5. But as is, she's worthy enough to be considered an above average test, but not enough to break into the top 10. After talking a ton about the votes for hardest or easiest boss overall being balanced in opposite directions outside of the average, Lady Butterfly manages top 10 votes for both. The reason being the same as her taking down a tumble from my own list. Many people have realized how broken her AI is after the passage of time. That and the difference in experience is based on when you fight the butterfly. I think a big reason a lot of people, me included, found Lady Butterfly so hard is because there's nothing stopping you from completing her too early. I fought her as my first boss after a relative ease clearing the Harada estate with only 3 Gourd Seeds and a single prayer bead chained to my name, which combined meant I could only really take around 2 big hits before dying. Take this perspective versus it's crazy how different the Lady Butterfly is if you don't yeet through the Harada estate as soon as possible. If you come back after having truly learned the game and getting some upgrades, she's easy peasy. This was my experience in a nutshell. I went to Harada and found the butterfly before GYOUBU, but once I realized how small the margin of error was with my current stats and healing, I left and came back after I collected a few prayer necklaces and had 7 gourd. That increases the error margin dramatically, which shifts the difficulty to the easier side even without an attack upgrade from GENICHIRO. Of course, these stances ignore the ability to exploit her easily step countered attacks and use a shuriken when she pops on a wire to make it go even more smoothly. This is all to say that I can understand how divergent people's experiences are with a Lady Butterfly. It really is dependent on when and how you fought her. She can be a really tough early game challenge, a mid game pushover, or somewhere in between. With all that in mind, I think coming in just before the halfway point of the list suits her nicely. The next 2 bosses are the most dramatically different from my list, shifting 4 spots from my own placement. With the True Corrupted Monk, it's hard to argue. I justified my ranking originally as imagining that it should be more difficult in theory based on its 3 health bars, but that's if you didn't know about the stealth strikes and firecracker weakness in your first playthrough. I discovered both in mine, so I'm guessing many of you did as well. That and those of you who thought the True Corrupted Monk was a lot easier than the false one. I struggled a lot on the false one, and when I walked onto the bridge, I was horrified to see it once again, but a minute later I was already on the second phase and soon after I finished the fight. The different moves in each phase just made the boss easier to hit. A totally fair point. Fake Monk trains you up for this fight, you've likely gotten better at the game's combat, your stats will be much improved, and the Monk has many attacks to leave it vulnerable like the snake spitting or the phase world that allows you to stealth strike it. Add in firecrackers and I can see why the tumble is warranted. Still, it's endgame damage level, multiple phases if you can pull off the stealth strikes, and it's at times relentless attacks are enough to push it inside the top 10. With the way people talk about Genichiro, I'm almost surprised that he isn't ranked higher. I don't know if it's because I had extra attack power from the butterfly or what, but I clearly missed the difficulty boat here. Genichiro at the top of ASHINA Castle was the longest it took me to beat a boss in the game. I lost count at how many times I kept dying, and I loved how once I finally did it, I actually managed to do it quite easily because Genichiro forced me to learn not only his attacks, but how to play the game in general. This really was when my playstyle shifted from Bloodborne and Dark Souls to Sekiro's deflecting playstyle. There were loads of other comments that more or less said the same thing. Genichiro is a tipping point for nearly everyone that makes you finally stop trying to dodge and embrace the deflect system. How well and quickly you adapted to this surely played a role in where you ranked him. On repeat runs, Genichiro interestingly manages to maintain his difficulty because of the bow. Even if you adapt to the deflect system without a substantial amount of posture, it's difficult to go full balls against him and be able to deflect everything perfectly, especially when he backsteps and rains arrows down upon your poor posture broken soul. But that further emphasizes how you should take each hit one step at a time and always be ready to deflect or reposition as needed. This deviation from the soul strategy of hit for a bit then dodge with iframes gave us all varying degrees of fits, which is more than enough to earn Genichiro's spot at number 8. It's probably silly to change my mind so quickly, but like True Corrupted Monk, the Headless Ape duo was another boss that I thought deserved to be ranked higher due more to it being difficult in theory than it actually being challenging. I personally beat it on my first try after spending over an hour on the ape himself, but I figured it was a fluke. Not quite. Duo apes become a lot easier when you realize 3 to 4 firecrackers turn 2 apes into 1 very quickly. In fact, from what I could find, all the comments echoed the same sentiment. Surprisingly, the 2 guardian apes were way easier. The headless one is an easy phase for me, and while the regular one has the normal ape moveset, it's a damage and posture sponge. 10 to 15 hits and it's dead. She's always behind the headless one, but you can run around and shoot off firecrackers and you're good to go. Someone on my quality ranking even pointed out to me that the ape's partner has a tendency to lag behind at regular intervals, making it even easier to plan out a quick way to eliminate her, which, even though it's been mentioned, I can't overemphasize how much firecrackers stack its posture. That said, there is still of course some difficulty present here with them both being able to two-shot you in some cases, and balancing them can be difficult if you don't manage them properly. I'm not sure if that's enough to give them my nod over Genichiro, but as it stands with the community, the Headless Ape duo falls just above him at number 7. Alright, you have all been killing it with the eloquent and thoughtful analysis, so let's keep it coming with the ape. Guardian Ape can suck my cheeks. The fatty. I hated that fight so much. I could not get used to his moveset. Alright, I'm gonna translate this to, you have hard to follow patterns matched with a high level of speed and aggression that are uncharacteristic of a chimp blown up to supersized proportions that would make a hippopotamus blush. You fatty. But beyond his moveset and high BMI, what's the real crux of his difficulty? My entire strategy was deflect, deflect, deflect. I found this extremely difficult to do since the ape wasn't using a sword on his first phase, and deflecting fists was much more difficult than deflecting a sword. I was pretty happy when he began using a sword in the second phase because it was much easier to build posture with. My biggest gripe is fuck those grapple attacks. Every time I swear I was out of range until he grabs me anyway and slams me down like I was one of his childhood bullies. You know, that's a fair point. I wouldn't be surprised if he had the power of God and anime on his side, because those grabs seem to warp through all thought and reason to grab you whenever they damn well please. And even though I personally find the second phase's weird sword patterns hard to deflect, there's no denying that the first phase's punches, slams, and belly flops are harder to deflect. I think that's because this first phase makes you forget most of the things you've learned to this point. Instead of encouraging deflects and metered aggression like the whole game has, suddenly it's time to dodge, jump, and play with a more passive approach. It's a definite design shift that comes out of nowhere, and I think that's largely what lands him here. Of course, there's also the sword phase, the screams, the grabs, his girthy health, his ship bombs, the list goes on. I can definitely agree that the ape is deserving of more credit than I initially gave him, perhaps even more so than the number 6 spot. I didn't beat any boss unless I mastered all of his moveset and learned how to reflect them, except for Great Shinobi Owl. This guy fights like a coward, constantly throwing Lloyd talismans, firecrackers, and smoke. And the worst part is he had no perilous attacks, so I can neither step on his gigantic sword nor Goomba his head. You know, that's a really fantastic point that I never brought up. Owl is weirdly one of the few sword-based bosses in the game that doesn't offer the opportunity at Makiris or dropkicks. It's especially interesting since the second variant of him does. For many of you, I believe that Owl was likely the second big skill check after GENICHIRO for deflection. I know he was for me. He's aggressive and fast enough that passive gameplay no longer works on him at all, while it could be used on earlier bosses. This is in part thanks to the small arena you find yourself in. The beauty of Al is that your timely deflections and aggression can be rewarded by getting behind his back on certain attacks like the 2 Shuriken Slam or Firecrackers to whittle down his vitality, but that requires adept precision. Add in all his different Shinobi tools to throw you for a loop, and patterns that only really match up with the second phase ape, who I've already mentioned can be a pain to deflect, and it starts to become crystal clear why the Al finds himself here. Just as with Emma, Fire ISSHIN wasn't taken on by over 60% of the voter base, but interestingly, he still garnered enough votes for the hardest boss to reach 7th. I really wonder if he wouldn't rank a bit higher if more players had faced off against him. I really hate ISSHIN, especially after fighting Emma. I've probably knocked off quite a few years of my life trying that boss after nearly perfecting Emma just to die by my own greed and impatience right toward the end of phase 3. Relatable, not a weeb, relatable. By the time I was regularly getting to ISSHIN's 3rd phase, I had all but mastered Emma. The thing is, since you're forced to do this boss in the mid-game, ISSHIN more than likely has the ability to 1 or 2 shot you in his final phase, which means any lapse in judgment can lead to immediate death. ISSHIN ASHINA in a nutshell. Everything is on fire. You were on fire. You are now being stabbed. On account of being very, very dead, you are no longer on fire. With his fire damage that builds up to roast you, attacks that can end your life at a second's notice, and a decently challenging preceding boss that drains your resources, it's no wonder Firelord ISSHIN lands inside the top 5. Allfather is the other boss that players haven't faced nearly as much as the others, with nearly 50% of voters having missed this fight. It's understandable considering the obscure quest you need to follow to reach it. Before we get to why he still managed to garner such a high score, I should remind you that my weighted scores make it possible for bosses to achieve a score slightly above 10. What's insane is that like the 3 easiest bosses being so low, the 3 highest bosses weighted averages all exceed 10. That should illustrate just how high the jump is for the final 3. Allfather is an amazing but difficult boss for the sole reason that he summons a spirit owl who can't decide if he wants to be an owl and do nothing, a stork carrying the owl's bulky ass around, or a goddamn phoenix blazing a trail of flame straight through you. This boss gave me daddy issues since he clearly prefers his morphing ghost pet to me. While daddy issues are far out of my pay grade, I can relate to the feeling of sheer confusion as what is coming my way in the second phase, at least at first. I will admit that after fighting him enough, the Phoenix Fire bringing on a scripted perilous thrust or him disappearing being an easy cue to run away then turn and punish as he appears were almost welcome parts to me. That said, this chunky Uncle Gale looking ass freak made me want to pull my eyes out with that damn firecracker slash one-shotty biggity bongo. Suck my left nut, Al. Agreed. While he does have a few familiar tactics and scripted moments in his second phase, he upped the ante on so many of his previous combos that it can be quite overwhelming. He hits hard and fast with swings that'll deplete your posture quickly. He has a wide variety of moves, a thrust combo that can kill you at max health, he can Mikiri your thrust and even perform a death blow on you. To top it all off, he recovers posture insanely fast and has a lot of health. When you add together the somewhat unpredictable nature of the second phase, the steroid-fueled combo strings that are new to this battle, and his high posture and vitality compared to his damage output, it's really no wonder why he finds himself this high. The only question is that if the other half of voters had faced off against him, if you would have cracked the top 2. As it stands, he's well deserving of being at least this high on the list. Man, there are a lot of people in the comments that got destroyed by Demon as much as I did. At least we have solidarity, my friends. These comments all had a common theme. Simply put, he is a Bloodborne boss without Bloodborne mechanics. You have to read his patterns and dodge at the perfect time, get a few hits in, and repeat. Your margin of error is so small in this fight. Even though other bosses are harder, you can master their fights and the mechanics. I never felt like I bested the Demon, I just lasted long enough not to get one shot. This comment perfectly describes my thoughts 1 month later. Over 100 comments all echoed the sentiment that the Demon of Hatred suddenly throws everything you learn the entire game out the window. In fact, remember this? I like how fucking Guardian 8 makes you forget most of the things you learned till this point. Then Demon of Hatred just says, fuck you, we in Dark Souls now, bitch. That's accurate. Deflecting in this fight barely works, blocking can work but stacks your posture super fast and reduces your ability to counter, and there are so many attacks that can nearly one-shot a full-blown vitality bar. Finally, I am 100% in agreement on the thought that beating the Demon doesn't feel like something I've mastered, instead I just feel like I survived. If you ask me today which boss I was the least confident I could pull out a victory in a single fight, my gut tells me Demon of Hatred. Does that make him the hardest boss in the game for me? Maybe, but for today he comes in at number 2 behind the nearly unanimous hardest boss in Sekiro. First time voting, feels good, man. Though I think we all know ISSHIN the Sword Saint is going to win. You, me, Miyazaki, and everyone other than a few select Fleck gods out there saw this coming from 10 miles away. Similar to our new wolf overlord, there's a new king in town, or so many comments would tell you. Let's take a brief review. Looking back at my old rankings from 2016, Orphan scored a 10.53, Mana scored a 10.60, and Meteor scored a 10.71 in 2017, which I believe is the highest we've ever seen on the channel. ISSHIN coming in at less than a 10th behind that should be indicative of just how absurd this difficulty is, and he actually scored above Orphan and Manus. While many of the bosses seem designed to teach you how to get good with a couple of aspects of combat, ISSHIN the Sword Saint turns it up to 11 and tests you on all of it at once. Insane difficulty, but for all the right reasons. This is it, Chief. The entire game has different pieces of a combat system that are all put together leading to this final standoff. You need to be able to deflect timings that are erratic as guardian apes or owls, faster than lady butterflies, take attack windows that require risky step counters that rival the expectations of the demon of hatred. He suddenly has a semi-automatic gun that is a ludicrous addition with his dual wielding considered, and with the GENICHIRO warm-up, it is the longest battle in the entire game, draining your endgame resources in a flash if you aren't flawless. I truly think the only thing that keeps him away from being the unquestioned hardest boss overall is the lightning in the third phase giving you a shortcut to victory. Getting there though is one of the most challenging hurdles FromSoft has ever created. But hey, that's just all of your opinions aggregated. What do you think? Do you agree with the community's ranking, or did you have a different experience from the average? Let us know in the comments below. I'll be doing a community post in the future for a poll on the quality of the bosses, and I want to thank everyone who commented once again. There were tons that were perfect for a quality ranking, so I'll be sure to read them back over when the time comes. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all that and the soon to return Kingdom Hearts, Devil May Cry, and Legend of Zelda rankings. Forgive me, I've been caught up in the Sekiro hype. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like. It means a lot to me to know you're enjoying the content. I want to thank you all for watching today, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.